Greetings everybody and welcome to the channel. I'm your host Hadrian. This week's episode, we are beginning the first of a many-part episode series which will cover the Caesars. Stretching from Augustus Caesar to Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, this series will stretch 500 years. So there'll be a lot of emperors to explore, and we will first start not with Augustus Caesar, who founded the empire, but instead with his forebearer, Gaius Julius Caesar. One cannot talk about the Caesars, one cannot explore the empire that was built on the foundations of his legacy, without of course exploring the man himself and the world in which he was raised. Thus, this first episode is the prologue. The beginning will obviously start with Augustus Caesar himself. Julius Caesar's life shaped the final years of the Republic, and it would be his death that ignited the struggle that would ultimately culminate in the birth of a 500-year-long empire, starting with Augustus Caesar, in the ashes of the old Republic. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in the year 100 BC, within the month of July that would eventually bear his name. The Julii family to which Caesar was born was an ancient lineage, which claimed to be descended from the god Venus. Yet despite the patrician status and ancient history of the family, only 3 men had risen to the position of consul, the highest office in the Republic. Caesar was born into a noble yet poor family. The home he grew up in was located in the Subaru, a poorer area of the city. Caesar was raised in the most chaotic years of the Republic. During the Social War, which was fought between the year 91 to 88 BC, Rome fought a bitter struggle against its own allies within Italy itself. A costly conflict which approximately 100,000 lives would be lost. It left devastation throughout Italia. Shortly after this war, another horrible civil war would also erupt between 2 factions within the city. Mithridates of Pontus was waging an open war against the Republic in the east, threatening the provinces of Rome. A massacre of nearly 80,000 Roman and Italians orchestrated by Mithridates enraged the Roman people. A campaign was to be undertaken to crush this rebellion and avenge this massacre. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was at present one of the consuls for that year. Having distinguished himself during the Social War, he was a likely candidate to prosecute the campaign in the east, one in which would be highly lucrative not only to the general who commanded it, but to the soldiers with which he went on this campaign. There were, however, 2 terrible realities that converged to begin the events in which Caesar would witness firsthand. One of the 2 factions of Rome, the Optimates, or the best as their enemies would sneer at them, represented the traditional conservative values of the Senate. Sulla was very much a man of this community. Born a patrician, he looked down on lesser plebeian rivals, who often championed the cause of the other faction of the Republic, the Populares. The legendary Gaius Marius was one such man, and for decades had been a lion and hero of the Republic. Winning 2 significant and deadly wars for the Roman people, his name was often spoken in the prayers of the citizens of the city. A novus homo, or new man, he was of plebeian descent. He often championed the cause of said populares, or the common people. Once told a prophecy that he would be consul 7 times, Marius had only occupied the office an obscene 6 times to this date. In that era, being consul once was considered a great honor. Marius, however, wanted more, and despite his political setbacks in the past, he had once again risen to prominence alongside his old rival Sulla during the very same social war. Sulla had, as senior consul, been granted the command against the war in the east with Mithridates. However, nearly 70 years old, and seeing his last chance at glory laid before him, Marius rallied his supporters among the plebs and common people to gain the command for himself, with Sulla absent from the city. Sulla had been involved in the siege of Nola when he learned the terrible news. His command had been stripped from him and given to his old rival. Indeed, Sulla was likely disgusted at what he saw as an affront to the traditions of the Republic. Marius had used in his mind the mob to rob him of his prize. Angry, Sulla informed his soldiers of the twisted turn of events. His men then stoned the messengers from Rome to death. Riding on his own fury and that of his army, Sulla did the unthinkable and marched on Rome, something that had never before happened, at least not by a general of the city. He violated the very law he sought to save because he saw the city under attack from this populare or demagogic faction. He crossed the pomerium of the city of Rome under arms, and then eventually took the city with little struggle. Marius fled before the approach of his nemesis. Restoring order and, most importantly, his stolen command, Sulla left with his legions to fight the Mithridatic Wars in the east after condemning Marius to death in absentia. Marius, however, would return to the city with Sulla gone shortly thereafter. Forging an alliance with a deposed consul named Cinna, they took the city, purging out of anyone they could find with sullen loyalty. Marius, after taking up his 7th and final consulship, would die shortly thereafter, but the faction that fought in his name would endure afterwards under the command of Cinna. And Caesar grew up during all of this chaos. Married to Cornelius Cinna, daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, the man who was now ruling Rome under the Marian banner. His wife would bear him a daughter, Julia, in the year 83 BC. Sulla, however, would eventually return and crush all the remnants of the Marian faction, and begin a bloody purge of the city to rid himself and his followers of their enemies. Caesar, who at this point had been high priest, found himself stripped of this title by Sulla, who was now dictator for life. In the year 81 BC, Caesar was forced into hiding when he refused to divorce his wife. The bloody proscription, the murder of enemies of the city, raged as Caesar did everything he could to avoid the wrath of Sulla. It was even said that Sulla had stated of Caesar, "I see many a Marius." Eventually, Caesar would be pardoned, and he elected to leave the city and fight in the military. A smart and prudent move if Sulla had elected to change his mind in any regard. Fighting in Asia, he would serve with distinction and eventually gain the coveted civic crown on his return to Rome. In 79, Sulla resigned his dictatorship and retired to public life. He would only live another year before dying of natural causes, but he left behind a legacy that would haunt the Republic for its final decades. After 2 years as a lawyer, Caesar traveled to Rhodes but was captured en route by Sicilian pirates. Held for ransom, he became indignant when he learned the sum that was being requested for his safe return. His captors wanted 20 talents of gold, but he demanded that they seek no less than 50. During his time, he told the pirates that after he was released, he would return and have them all crucified. The pirates had figured he was joking. However, upon said release, he did exactly that, raising a fleet and returning personally to crucify the entire lot of them. Mercifully, however, having taken somewhat of a liking to them, he slit their throats to ease their suffering. Clearly, he was not joking. After fighting in the Third Mithridatic War, he would serve as military tribune, and then in 69, he would rise to the rank of quaestor. After the death of his wife, he would remarry, this time to Pompeia, one of Sulla's granddaughters. It was, however, in 63 BC, Caesar's star began to rise. First, he was elected Pontifex Maximus, the highest office of the chief priests of Rome. This position was highly coveted, and came with its own residence on the Via Sacra. After his praetorship in 62, Caesar would divorce Pompeia after a scandal in which his wife's reputation and faithfulness to her often unfaithful husband came to the public eye. He was to have said that Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. In 61 BC, Caesar became the governor of Hispania Ulterior. Through his dealings with Crassus, the richest man in Rome, he was able to leave for his post. His creditors had demanded some form of guarantee due to his vast debts that he had incurred rising up the political ladder to this point. During his campaigns in Spain, he gained the rare and prestigious right to hold a triumph upon his return to Rome. It was his intention now that his reputation had been well established to return to Rome and run for the office of consul. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, had just returned from his highly successful campaigns in the east. Both Pompey and Crassus had been chief lieutenants and loyalists of Sulla during his rise to the dictatorship and during his wars. The two men despised each other completely and were rivals. After Pompey returned to Rome and completed his triumph, he found himself out in the cold, struggling to deal with the Senate. A lifelong soldier, he was a horrible politician. Crassus, however, was much more cunning, and seeking to bring his rival down, he worked tirelessly to undermine the quote-unquote great Pompey, as he sneered. Cato, the younger, a leading figure of the Senate, was only too happy to oblige. He and his allies likely felt threatened by Pompey and his enormous popularity with the population and the army. With Caesar's return to the city under arms, he was forbidden to cross the sacred pomerium, as Sulla had done. He was forced to wait outside the city, ready to celebrate his triumph as was tradition, a once-in-a-lifetime parade that was dedicated to his honor. With the clock ticking down to register for the consular elections, Caesar had asked for an extension so he could complete his triumph and then register afterwards. Cato, however, did not want Caesar to hold this office, and he was more than willing to sabotage him, executing a filibuster to run out the clock. Caesar abandoned his triumph, entering the city to seek the consulship, something which nobody had expected. The election for that year was beyond corrupt. Even the incorruptible Cato began to bribe in order to prevent Caesar from claiming victory. That is how serious he saw the threat. Despite this, however, likely with the deep pockets of his ally and friend Crassus, Caesar claimed one of the two consulships alongside of Marcus Bibulus. Cato likely felt relieved that at least Bibulus, a staunch conservative, could keep Caesar in check. He was in complete error in this assessment. It was then that the other shoe dropped. It became fast apparent that Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus had formed a deadly and formidable alliance of mutual self-interest. This first triumvirate, as it has become known, signaled the death rattle of the Republic. Rome's greatest soldier, Pompey, the richest man in the Republic, Crassus, had united together under the lesser Caesar, who had now become greater than them both. This alliance allowed Pompey and Crassus to both enact and pass the legislation that they wished, to enable themselves and their powerful colleagues. Cato was likely beside himself, and he was not alone. Even the great orator Cicero, another senator, could see the danger that this three-headed monster presented. As long as Caesar held political office, he held the protection from prosecution that was provided to him by the Republic. To help seal this alliance, Caesar married his own daughter Julia to Pompey. This union bound the two men together, politically and as family as well. Caesar remarried at this point and began to enact the triumvirate's agenda with eager resolve. Near the end of his consulship, however, he secured himself the governorship of Roman Gaul. This unprecedented command was set at 5 years instead of the traditional one. This command would keep him with this political security that he required, freeing him from prosecution while he was still an officer of the state. Caesar set to work in the long process of conquering Gaul, a campaign which should take almost a decade. His command was extended by his allies until his final victory over Vercingetorix at Alesia in 52 BC. This Gallic War, as it would become known, would cost the lives of over 1 million Gauls before finally Rome gained the upper hand. Caesar would then head towards Britain, making the first landing on the island, and also cross into Germany, building a bridge and then returning back to Roman territory before burning it down as a signal of strength to the Germanic tribes. It was at this period, however, that his world began to crumble. The death of his daughter Julia during childbirth was likely devastating for him, and understandably so. Even worse, however, was the failing support of Pompey, now free from Caesar and their familial alliance. Constantly under pressure, Pompey was assaulted near daily by Cato and the Senate to free himself from Caesar and the alliance that he had formed. By the year 53 BC, the remaining relationship between these two men began to collapse. The death of Crassus on campaign in the Far East against Parthia had caused the relationship to come to a head. Fears of a civil war mounted daily. With the defeat of the Gauls, finally in 52 BC, the standoff began to grow in intensity. Caesar was ordered to disarm and return home now that his term had expired by Pompey, the sole consul for that year, a highly unusual affair. Feeling threatened by the legal ramifications, Caesar demanded the right to seek the consulship in absentia to protect himself, which was refused by the Senate. Cicero attempted to deflate the rising tension by having both men disarm, but ultimately failed in his efforts. In the year 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, heading south with a single legion. Pompey, in the fog of war, panicked, unaware of how small a force that Caesar commanded. He fled to Greece, leaving behind the treasury, much to the delight of Caesar upon his arrival at the city. The vast majority of the Senate fled with Pompey as well, now seeing them as their champion. Caesar, now facing danger on two fronts, had to decide which course of action to take. Pompey was raising an army in Greece, but he also commanded the legions of Spain as well. Heading to Spain, Caesar quickly crushed the forces there before returning to Rome and standing for the consulship, unopposed. He then headed to Greece to face Pompey and the Senate. At Dyrrhachium, Caesar's reputation for cleverness aided him mightily. His forces had routed completely, abandoning the field to Pompey's legions. Believing it was a trap, Pompey did not pursue Caesar. This caused Caesar to say that they would have won today if they had been commanded by a winner. A month later, in August 48 BC, Caesar smashed Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus. His men even feasted on the dinner that had been prepared for Pompey and the Senate that very evening in their enemies' now captured camp and tents. Pompey fled for his life, hoping to raise another army in Egypt to continue the fight. Pompey, however, was assassinated on the orders of the Pharaoh of Egypt. He had hoped killing Pompey would curry favor with Caesar and help him in his civil war against his wife and sister, Cleopatra. Angry at this, Caesar instead elected to back Cleopatra against her brother, helping her defeat him and take his throne. He also fell in love with her, having an affair, which resulted in the birth of his biological son, Caesarion. Arriving at Rome in 46 BC, Caesar arranged to become the dictator of Rome for 10 years. Fighting a battle against Pompey loyalists at Thapsus, he once again gained victory. Then, in 45, at the Battle of Munda, Caesar not only fought for victory, but his very own life. However, with this final battle, Caesar had exterminated the last of his enemies in the field. In the Senate, however, that was another matter. Upon his return to Rome in 44 BC, he became dictator for life. Surrounded by many of the men he had fought and pardoned, he was stabbed to death 23 times, expiring on the Ides of March during a session of the Senate. His death would mark, in my opinion, the final end of the Republic. Believing that they had liberated the city from the tyrant, the liberators, as they became known, had greatly miscalculated. Caesar was a staunch populare, and he was enormously popular with the citizens of the city and the men in the army. Instead of destroying the tyrant, they had merely set the stage for more years of continuous bloody wars in which would now be fought in the name of Caesar by his adoptive son and heir, Octavian, his great-nephew. Alrighty, that will do it for this week's episode. On next week's episode, we will start with episode number 1, dealing with Augustus Caesar, his life, and ultimate victories over Mark Antony. If you feel that I've earned it, please click the subscription button, like, and comment below. Also, please follow me on Twitter at HadronTV to be kept in the loop in any future episodes, polls, and content for the channel. Thanks for watching.